Hello, my name is Zizaran, and this is a Gladiator build. In the guide itself, we'll mostly be talking about one-handed Axis and Cyclone and Sunder, but through the guide, we'll talk a little bit about how to use other weapons, so like swords and maces, and we'll also talk about how to change the build over if you want to try, for example, Lacerate or a lot of the new skills that are coming out. It should also be a very easy build to follow for new players, so I hope you enjoy. First, I'm going to start by explaining how we use Path of Building in the guides, and we use it quite a lot more than most guides you might be used to. If you've already seen this part, you can move to the description down below and click a timestamp button to skip directly to the guide. So first you need Path of Building. Path of Building is a third-party program that you can download, and it's in the description down below. It's completely safe, and most people use it. It's a very powerful tool that lets you plan out your builds and import items, stuff like that. Now, once you have Path of Building, you can go and import the Path of Building link here by pasting it here. Once you have that, it should look, well, it depends what build you're importing, because I'll use this for everything. But it should look like the build of the video you're watching. And what we do, and I'm using a Gladiator Cyclone build here as an example, I show a step-by-step of what the skill tree looks like at certain levels. So at early levels, it's very, very easy, especially if you're a new player, to follow. And I also say when to ascend, and the ascension points are generally here, and I'll talk about that in the specific video as well, and why things are chosen. But as you can see, the skill tree is evolving over time, and sometimes there will be variations for, you know, if it's like different weapons, if it's one-hander, two-hander, and a lot of things like that. But wait, there's more. Under the skills, we usually do all like the different skills plus the leveling one. I'm trying out a new sort of like alphabetized group. So this is like your main attack skill. So as you can see here, you have ground slam to 8 to 12, but at 12 it gets replaced by Sunder, and I kept that in the same like A, just so you're understanding what I'm replacing it with if there's no leveling video accompanying it. So hopefully that'll make it very clear. Same here with obviously at early level you're using Ancestral Protector, and then you replace that same B with War Chief later on. So we'll also put notes, like for example here, Pulverize doesn't exist yet in Path of Building, and there's a few things that they're just not in Path of Building at the time that I'm making this guide. This is going to happen a lot on videos that are made around launch. Just Path of Building's not updated yet, so that's just not what much we can do about. And for the most part, I'll always put gems in a priority level. Like my first priority is always going to be Onslaught, just because it ups your clear speed so much while killing. And you can see like different utilities and stuff. And another example here is plus blood and sand, because that again doesn't exist in Path of Building. We also have different types of items. So here we have early game axis, mid game axis, and end game axis. I think the jewels are displayed here. Yes. So the way I do this is I make some like fairly okay items that are like, you know, depending on how fast you play, somewhere that you'll have them between day 1 to 3. And if you don't know how to get a tabula, for example, you can farm that in Act 9 fairly easily in Blood Aqueduct. And we go through here, and it's I never in my guides will put resists on the life gear, because just you need to be resist capped. That's very important. 75% all resist. Remember that you lose resist in Act 5 and 10. And then on the jewels, I'll try to do 4-slot jewels and try to say as many good stats as possible for that build. So there's no like, you don't see the same one twice here, but all of these work for the build. Hopefully that'll help. And then this is generally how I recommend rolling flasks. There's even more in the notes as well. Mr. Madiki will generally go through and tell you exactly where to buy the skill gems that you're needed. This is actually a tip by another streamer called Lyric, who said he was sad there was nothing like this in Path of Exile guide. So I was like, that is actually a great idea for new players. So we have that. So if you're wondering where to buy things, or if it can't be bought by your specific class, we call it a mule. Then you have to use another character to use it or to buy it, and all the details for that is in here. So hopefully it now makes more sense how to use the guides and how they work. Let's continue with the build guide. Right. Normally when I level this skill, I use Sunder. And if you go straight to the skills and see here, you start off with Ground Slam. Cleave works as well, really early. And once you hit level 12 and unlock Sunder, I'll normally use that. It's just really great for leveling. Once you have Sunder and Onslaught, and then later on Melee Physical, that's a lot of damage. It's really great. Very good leveling experience. Now, some of the new gems have a lot of flat added physical, and I haven't really had the chance to try those. So some of the new gems with flat physical might be very, very enjoyable to level with, because they're scaling per level and not necessarily based on how good your gear is. A lot of these skills are red skill gems, so it's very easy for you to like take out Sunder and throw in another skill. There's a few like Lacerate that are green, but you know, it's generally fairly easy to swap them out without even having to chrome too much. I normally end up staying Sunder until something like level 70, 80, thereabouts. There's a couple of things that you definitely want before switching to Cyclone, namely at least 25% movement speed boots and a fairly good Quicksilver, which is called Adrenaline. That gives you very, very high movement speed. And there's another item called Devotor's Devotion as well. Like, just the more movement speed you can get, the more fun you're gonna have on Cyclone. So as I showed, you can see all the different points here of on how to level your character. And in the skills, we've tried to be as clear as possible with when to use what and how to use it. And we can talk a little bit about the items. So early game, it's mostly rares. We've put on some like 240 DPS siege axes here. Siege axe is definitely what you want to try to craft on. Throw some, you know, you can use either flat fist essences or the attack speed essence, and hope that you get a decent one. Even if you just hit attack speed or fist and craft the other, you should at least be able to get over 250. So that's what we're starting out with. All the other gear here pretty much just has life on it. That's the only thing I wanted to be, you know, you need life. For resistances, I never put that specifically on gear, because it doesn't really matter where you get the resistances, but you need to get them. You need to have at least 75% fire, cold, and lightning resist. And please remember that you lose resist in Act 5 when you kill Kitava and Act 10 when you kill Kitava. So make sure that you realize that. Tabula Rasa is normally what I have at like the end of my early stage. You farm one in Blood Aqueduct in Act 9. It's from the Humility cards, and I do recommend that. The Flasks as well. I don't really recommend unique ones early on because it can be hard to get, but we have that later. And all the Viridian, or all the jewels, are basically some of the best mods you can get on jewels, and I just wanted to make a list of that. Obviously, try to get 3. And life is obviously the best stat. Mid game, we got higher DPS axes, 340, so some decent axes here, hopefully. Devotor's Devotion, really, really good. Feels good for pretty much any attack build. Movement speed for running around, attack speed for leap slamming faster and attacking faster. You can try to get a decent 6-thing chest by farming, for example, Chains That Bind, Dapper Prodigy. Dapper Prodigy is probably the easiest one to farm. It drops in Residence. That can be any 6 things, but they're generally going to sell if it's not something you can use. And maybe you've managed to find or 6-thing something yourself as well, but that's a useful alternative until you can get a good unique chest later. Just try to get slightly higher life here is basically the TLDR. And at this point, you can try to get a Stygian Vice. And here's an example of what a Stygian jewel or Murderous Eye jewel would look like. Flasks here have changed slightly. You can see that I've removed or added Alchemist Quicksilver of Adrenaline. This is even faster. Now, to be fair, if you're only leap slamming, you don't really need a Quicksilver. Just so that's said. Sulfur Flask is also actually a really good damage blast. Make sure you don't use Sorrow the Divine because it gives you Zealot's Oath, which I think it still does even after the changes. But Lion's Roar does a lot of damage. The knockback usually isn't too bad because a lot of the time you are one-shotting anyway. And Atziri's Promise is a huge damage boost. For the endgame, we have Torment Renjoke, and Belly of the Beast is one good option as the 6-link chest for endgame. There are a few other ones that are good too. You have Carcass Jack, Belly of the Beast, Lore Weave are all pretty good options. Another unique worth mentioning is Soul Taker is a fairly good mid to endgame axe. Lets you restore all your mana as well without worrying about it. And another item worth mentioning is the Carnage Heart, which can be pretty good early on for giving you resist, some leech, and damage. Tomb Fists, fairly good late game, and here you see they have a Murderous and a Searching Eye. Just good movement speed boots. Try to get a... You might struggle with int on this build, so I would recommend getting a Lapis Amulet. If you really have to, you can take 30 int on the tree down here, and crafting int on either your rings or your amulet, or trying to get like a steel ring late game with high int would be very nice. An alternative is just keeping your conk effect at a lower level, because that's most likely what's gonna be upping the int requirement. Nothing else has really changed in the endgame one, and that's sort of the main things. Bandits for this build is skill point. You kill everything. This is mainly based of like RT or just getting high accuracy, but we're not particularly scaling crit in this build. I'll hopefully be making a crit cyclone build and crit builds later, but for this one you want to have the 2 passives. And for your Pantheon, I would say there's a couple options. The Crab Pantheon is especially good if you're playing hardcore and you don't want to be stunned between sundering packs and stuff. You have the both the Solaris and Lunaris are really good options. I probably prefer Solaris. And for the minor ones, one of the best things for any life build is doing Shakari, and it's the Desert Springs boss. If you use a Divine Vessel and upgrade that, your character is immune to poison. And poison is a very dangerous mechanic in maps when there's loads of things hitting you. So definitely worth upgrading that. Doing the dig map and upgrading the Garakan Pantheon is really good as well. It gives you movement speed when you haven't been hit recently, which can be really nice to up your clear speed. Now I want to talk a little bit about the skill tree and stuff. So as all my guides, they're like from early on to late game, and you can check that there, and you can see the ascendancies, the ascendancy choices. And I do Arena Challenger first. Whenever you're in Sand Stance, which is a new stance, I think you get that at level 4 and you can swap between them. I believe the first aura is called Blood and Sand or something like that. And we'll have that in the skills. And Sand Stance is whenever you kill a monster, you get 2% more attack and movement speed. And this multiplies the rest of your attack and movement speed. It's huge. And you really, really feel it. Suddenly you're kind of like just racing ahead. You really want to keep that up. Whenever you're doing bosses, just hit your hotkey for changing that to Blood Stance, and then you can keep it up for bosses too. So it's great. Made a very, very big difference for me while trying this out early on. And then for Cruel Lab, I do Blood in the Ice, Merciless Lab, Gratuitous Violence. Now, a lot of the time I do like getting this early, but I felt like the Arena Challenger was simply too big to not have it. So Gratuitous Violence is my Merc Lab. That's when you get 50% chance to bleed here. Alternatively, you could put in chance to bleed somewhere if you don't feel it's consistent enough. With high attack speed, it should be making everything bleed and popping very nicely. Your Uber Lab, Outmatch and Outlast is very nice. You get free Frenzy charges and free Endurance charges. So really, really good node here. Definitely notice it tank-wise. And for the rest of the tree, we've chosen to go with axes, but obviously swords and maces are fairly good choices as well. Now, obviously, you can see a very, very easy switch over here. If you were switching to maces, you take for potentially these nodes instead of these. Like, there's a lot of damage-specific nodes that you can just opt out of the axe ones and take the other ones. We'll be making a Slayer guide as well. In the Slayer one, I was thinking I was just going to focus on two-handers, and we can tell people to go between each guide just to see the differences, because they're both duelists and they're going to look virtually the same except two-hander, one-hander. So between these two guides, you should be able to figure out exactly how to mix and match and go between swords or go between axes. Quick example is obviously if you were using two-handers, you would take Butchery instead of Strong Arm. You would take Destroyer instead of Dervish. So it's fairly easy, even as a new player, to just go through and change the nodes over from one-handers to two-handers or from swords to axes. So it's a very versatile tree. There's also like a lot of new skill gems coming out, like Bladestorm, that might be really great, but we just haven't had a chance to try them out yet. So this skill tree, and especially between this and the Slayer one, you have a lot of versatility to change between them. Another really good option, especially for your solo self-found players out there, is to go Gladiator early on, and when you pick up a unique glove called Hemophilia, which gives you the bleed explosion similar to Gratuitous Violence, you can switch over to Slayer, still have that nice clear speed adding Hemophilia bleed explosion, but you get all the beefy Slayer nodes. So this is a really good early game thing, and then you transition into that with a ton of regrets, but it's worth it. If you're wondering how to respec a character, it's 5 regrets per thing, so it would be a total of 40 to respec from a Gladiator. Once you've removed all your Ascendancy points from one class, when you touch the altar at the end of a labyrinth, it'll give you the options between the 3 again, as if you were ascending from the first time. This should be a very strong build. If you see here, I recommend fairly early to take the leech nodes here. Once you're dealing a decent amount of damage, this should be enough that you can actually drop a mana flask early on. Late game, you don't really need this because there's so many other ways of leeching mana. You can in some ways get Warlord's Mark. This is one example of leech, which has physical attack damage leeched as mana on a jewel. There's also mana gained per hit on jewels. So these are some really great examples of ways of getting mana, and life leech is fairly easy to get. Don't have to worry too much about that. I think that sums up the majority of the things I wanted to talk about today. Hopefully this guide helps you a lot, and if there are any questions or you run into any problems, I should be able to answer all of them. Drop by my channel at twitch.tv/Zizaran. And thanks for watching. Try to die less than I do.